Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Tuesday, October 28th. I'm your host, Tom Moore. The Penn State game in 4 days, the game against Michigan in 32 days. On today's show, we're welcoming our buddy Ross Fulton, the X's and O's guru at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And when Ross is on the show, we're sponsored by Jeff Ruby's of Columbus, proudly offering nationally acclaimed USDA prime steaks, seafood and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation today. All right, so on these shows, we normally are breaking down the film from Ohio State's previous game on the previous Saturday. Well, Ohio State didn't have a game on the previous Saturday, so instead we're going to be taking a look at some of the sort of bigger picture stuff that we don't normally get a chance to talk about in too much detail. We're also going to be answering a couple questions from you guys. We asked you on the last week's show to ask, leave any questions you have in the comments of those previous videos. Got some good ones, so we'll be answering a couple of those later on in the show. But first, Ross, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the storylines that we've been talking about a bunch this season, including Ohio State's use of different formations, different personnel. Obviously, heavy tight end usage has been a topic of conversation, a topic of some consternation among Ohio State fans. You know, it feels like that's sort of dialing back a little bit, using 14 personnel and 13 personnel. That's sort of starting to go away. But where are you seeing that? Are you seeing that in the numbers? And then what is that translated to in terms of production?
J. Bud Davis on X, highly recommend. He puts together these snapshots for teams of their various usage and what they're facing on defense. And I mean, you can see in the numbers, it unfortunately does not have 13 or above, but just in terms of 12, which I assume is 12 personnel and above, Ohio State's been in that 37% of the time. So, which might feel a little light. When you anecdotally, you're like, oh, they're in 12 personnel a lot. It's still less than 11. But it's still like relative to college football as a whole. He like puts together how often do you do something, and then like how's it compare to like the median in college football? They're using that 15% more of the time than your average college football team. So it's certainly higher, certainly an uptake. This is always sort of a trade-off, right? I think if we like put the 13 and 14, like even those heavier looks to the side, I mean, if you're going to ask me, what their best 11 is, I continue to think it probably is 12 personnel with Kazmarek and Claire as your two tight ends, probably overplaying 11 personnel with Brandon Ennis in the slot. So you understand personnel-wise why it's kicked up. But it is, honestly, like when you look at the numbers, they've been probably more efficient than some people might think from heavier personnel, but not particularly as explosive. And so, I guess you might expect that. Although with the heavier sets, you've been hoping that you get, teams coming down to the box, which they have. When you look at the numbers, like they faced a heavy box, almost half the time, 48% of the time, which again is well above the college football average. So like we talked about, like they're playing some heavier personnel and they're getting lots of heavy boxes to take away the run.
So I'll have you sort of define where is the line that makes it a heavy box versus a light box? And you would think, okay, heavy box, that should mean that there's lots of stuff open deep. Why are they not throwing the ball more if teams are putting more guys closer to the line of scrimmage? So a little bit of a twofer there for you.
Yeah, so I'm somewhat surmising, I have to say, how Bud Davis characterizes it, but he listed it like light box, 6-man box, and a heavy box. So I presume heavy box is 7 or more inside the tackle box. And, to answer your question, so again, like as we've talked about, we've sort of borne that out, right, with some of the clips we've shown of teams, having an extra hat in the box or being gapped out. The answer to why aren't they throwing deep against it is because a lot of what they're getting is cover 3, right? Where you have 3 deep zone defenders and 4 underneath. And so that allows you with cover 3, you can roll a safety down. I mean, Ohio State defensively does this a lot. So you bring a safety into the box, but you have 3 deep defenders and like you're getting those real soft zones, particularly in the corners, protecting themselves. So like, that corner has a deep third, so he can always be on top of a receiver vertically. So, you like to attack cover 3 with, flood routes and like hitting, so you see a lot of curl flat from Ohio State against all this cover 3 and then like hitches and like hit the seams. And, those seam routes we've showed a couple of times are sort of probably the area where Julian Sayin hasn't quite pulled the trigger the most. And so that's sort of like, I think there's been some opportunities there from time to time. But as we've shown, he's obviously progressing, and I think like he'll get there. But that's probably why some teams have felt comfortable, staying in cover 3 to stay on top of Jeremiah Smith, and take their chance in the middle of the field.
All right, so we'll transition from middle of the field to middle of the field. And one of the stats that we have discussed is middle of the field open versus middle of the field closed. And this is something that feels somewhat self-explanatory, but maybe just sort of lay it out for people in terms of what that actually means. And I'm assuming the answer is that Ohio State's seeing a lot more middle of the field closed this year than a lot of teams.
Yeah, that sort of picks up on what I was saying regarding cover 3, right? So middle of the field closed just means like, if you're middle of the field closed, it means you have a safety in the middle of the field, basically over the ball, but 15 yards back. If it's middle of the field open, you're usually playing 2 high safeties, either cover 2 or cover 4. When you're in the middle of the field closed, it's generally cover 1 or cover 3. So, cover 1 is man coverage with the deep safety. Cover 3, as we just said, is like a zone 3 deep, 4 under. So they're facing a lot of middle of the field close, as you said, 54% of the time. So again, 8 percentage points higher than the average offense in college football faces. But they are only seeing man 19% of the time, which is well below what your average college football offense faces. So the upshot of that is if you got a lot of middle of the field close and not much man, you're getting lots of cover 3. And so that's what we were saying. So obviously teams do not want to play them in man coverage. We saw what happened against Minnesota when they did want to play man coverage. And you're talking about explosives. You're getting a lot of, as I said, the soft cover 3 zone, which is why, as we talked about last week, why these RPOs are so effective, because you're just getting these free access hitches and outs where these coverages or corners are bailing. And so, that's how defenses are protecting themselves, right? As I said, they want to get an extra hat in the box against the run. But they also don't want to get beat deep. And they're basically hoping that Ohio State will choose to run like we've seen them do. And they'll get Ohio State behind the sticks and hopefully can get off the field. And so that's why those RPOs, in my mind, are so critical. Ohio State still, again, according to Bud Davis, they've run RPOs 15% of the time, which is actually below the college football average. So I'm sure if you just use the Wisconsin game, it would be above. But obviously, we've shown whether it was the first half against Washington or Illinois, times where they looked like RPOs, but it sure didn't seem like the read was live because the free access throws were there. So I think, as we can talk about, I think a big chunk of what will help the run game is continue to use those and force teams out of those cover 3 looks.
All right, I'm going to sort of skip ahead because we have a question about teams trying to take away the RPO, and I want to get that in right now. This one is from Perry Ellison, 5255. He wants to know, will teams be able to take away the RPO if their corners simply play press?
They can take away some of them, like those free access reads, right? Like those hitches we showed against Wisconsin. That read is generally gone. I mean, you can read a post snap if the corner bails quickly. And we showed against Wisconsin, right, that later in the game, they rolled their corners up. They were still in cover 3, so they bailed. And they kept their safety in sort of where you would throw that glance route. But the upshot is then you should be able to run the ball better, right? Because I showed that one clip against Wisconsin where suddenly that safety isn't quite as nosy, and now you're gaining 5 or 6 yards instead of 3 or 4 before you get to that unblocked defender, because that safety is just not accounted for in the blocking scheme. And so you can do that. You can roll your safety. You can obviously play cover 1, right? Cover 1 takes away RPOs because now you've accounted for the various receivers. If teams, as we said, though, if teams want to play cover 1, that obviously opens up opportunities downfield, opens up slants, crossing routes, the like, or you can play cover 2, right? And because you get your corners squatting in the flat. So again, take away some of those free access throws. But now, again, you're too high. You should get advantageous numbers to run the ball. So Ohio State's such a good passing team, and obviously has their 2 biggest threats outside. So they really shouldn't be getting teams wanting to play them super heavy in the box. And the fact that Julian Sayin has an 80% completion percentage, again, sort of shows that they're probably being too conservative if they really had to put the pedal down, because that just shows it's too easy for them to pass the ball. Basically, you're super efficient passing, and they're almost below average efficient running it. So I presume they'll keep as I said, post Wisconsin. Like, not sure they'll, RPO'd every time, all the time, depending on what teams are giving them. But I think they're going to have to use the pass to help their run game.
That was a really long and detailed and really good answer. That was sort of an explanation of, we hear opposing coaches talking about having to pick your poison against Ohio State. That was, I thought, a great description of the details of exactly what all the different kinds of poison are and which one you have to pick. There is not a do-it-all, one size fits all answer to stopping the Ohio State offense, because they can do a bunch of different stuff. One of the things that they, I think, would probably like to do more is take those deep shots. As you said, a lot of teams are trying their very best to keep Ohio State from being able to throw the ball down the field. How much is Ohio State throwing? Are they throwing down the field more than other teams, less than other teams, more than you'd expect, less than you'd expect? Where are they on those deep shots?
Yeah, so again, using Bud Davis's numbers, deep throws, which he defines as 15 yards or more in the air, right? Ohio State is only doing that 15% of the time, which is 13 percentage points below like the college football average. So they're not doing it quite as much, right? And there's some scheme issues to that, like we just described. I think we've shown, right, over time, particularly like early in the season, I think Julian Sayin was conservative. Like we've showed a couple examples where he's, whether it was that Wisconsin game, the seam throw potentially to Jeremiah Smith, where he had to move off his launch point because of, the blocking, and he dumped it down to Bo Jackson, which was still an explosive play, but just done differently, or, just what they've been calling. Ohio State has not been taking a ton of shots downfield. I do think sometimes the general focus on Jeremiah Smith ignores the fact that like Carnell Tate's had a bunch of explosive plays as well downfield. But I do think, and it's not just like throwing it vertically, right? Like we showed some of it, like those deep, sail route concepts, or like Y crosses, like getting things, deep digs, things again over the middle of the field where you can attack the second level of cover three. And I don't have doubt that Julian Sayin can do that. We've seen him do it. I think it's just like, they want to develop him along. And again, so like these season stats, I think, can obscure sometimes, like, that Texas game was there. They were in a very different place than where they are now.
We've kind of talked around a little bit some of the issues in the run game, and I do want to get to those next. But one of the areas that I was wondering about with that is when you're not able to run the ball super well or super consistently. I mean, they've been efficient, but not explosive generally in the run game. But sometimes they haven't been particularly efficient either. How much does that impact what they're able to do with play action? Obviously, if you have a really strong run threat, that would seemingly increase your ability and the level of threat from play action passing. How has that impacted Ohio State's ability to use play action this year?
I don't think so at all. And like, that's like sort of one, right? Like one of the things that advanced stats has shown is like, you don't actually have to be a good run team for play action to be effective. Linebackers and second level defenders respected no matter what. But I do think like one of the things I have liked about what I've seen from the Ohio State offense under Ryan Day and Brian Hartline this year is they've been pretty consistent in using play action from under center and pistol, like those heavy looks, heavy bootleg. Again, helps Julian Sayin's like comfortable throwing bootlegs on the run. But like, we've obviously talked in previous years where it's like, oh, they had a game where they were in pistol and it was 100% run. They've been, I think, as I said, very consistent with play action this year. In fact, like, again, look at the same stats for Bud Davis. They've used play action 49% of the time they're passing, which is, 19 percentage points above the college football average. So a lot of play action. Obviously, like, play action comes in many forms, right? Like, they can be in the gun and Sayin can kind of stick the ball out and you're given, but as opposed to like under center, you're pulling a guard. You've got like those deep 2-man routes, like that Day like so much. The last of what, for example, like Jeremiah Smith's last catch against Wisconsin came off of that on that deep dig. So obviously different types of play action, but I do think I've been pretty pleased with the amount and the types of play action they've used this season.
All right, so I got to ask you about the offensive line. That has obviously been a big point of concern for a lot of Ohio State fans. How big of a concern is it? Where is the concern, if there is one? I mean, where do things stand right now with the offensive line?
I think it's a moderate concern. I think the last 2 weeks, Illinois and Wisconsin, like both, there definitely been some execution breakdowns. Like we talked about the numbers in the run game earlier, and like that's obviously I still think personally a bigger issue. And like if you clean up the box, it will make like the identification for the offensive line easier. I do think they've been trying a lot of run concepts, maybe to which as I've said, I in theory like, but maybe it's been too much for them. And they like need to sort of, bring down the number and rep things more that are working, and discard those that aren't. Like they went from being super heavy gap early in the season, like picking up on the playoffs to now they've been more and more zone as time goes on. So maybe they see that. But there are definitely execution breakdowns. I mean, some on the left side, but much more so on the right side. Phil Daniels, like his feet and pass protection are pretty slow. Pass protection has not been a big issue. Part of like that is because Julian Sayin moves very well in the pocket and can feel the rush. And so that makes it, and Ryan Day has historically had a very good track record of like doing things like to protect the quarterback. Like he'll use different 6-7 man pass protections, different slide, chip, pull guys, full slide, half slide. But the run game, I'd say the primary concern is Tegra Shabola. Like he's almost started he started at least for a year and a half now. And you just like see the same problems over and over again. Like he leans too far forward, so it's hard for him to pick up slants and stunts. And I should say that's been like the majority of the issues the offensive line has had is like identification / handling between them, like when teams are slanting and stunting, which they're getting a lot of. At least they did for both Illinois and Wisconsin. So that's been causing them problems. So, obviously Josh Padilla has been playing some for Tegra. I wouldn't be surprised if his role continues to grow. I mean, he's still a little small. Like he certainly does not bring the physical presence that Shabola brings. But, as long as they like keep having these miscues, you want someone who's like being technically sound. So I personally don't think like either of them, like I don't think Tegra is going to go from starting to not playing at all, but I wouldn't be surprised if the numbers get more even in terms of snaps.
All right, and then let's close before we get to our last question from a viewer. I do want to kind of close some of the broader questions with just sort of the issues they've had in the run game. When you look at the numbers, how big of an issue is it? Because I think at times it has felt like this team can't run the ball against anyone, and it's a total disaster. It is, and sorry, when I say it has felt, I mean people online are saying. So you sort of get that perspective on things. And then you also look at some of the efficiency numbers and it's like, well, it's maybe not nearly as bad as you think it is sometimes. So what are you seeing in the numbers and what do you think is the actual root cause of whatever issues there are in the run game right now?
Yeah. So when you look at the Bud Davis numbers, Ohio State's actually has pretty good success rate, right? Like he uses a color coding. The darker the green is, the more successful you are, and like purple is like you're below average, right? So like everything Ohio State's doing, with maybe the exception of inside runs, but even that's like they're all green, right? Like on success rate. So Dave's talked about that, right? Like by success rate, we mean did you get 4 yards when you ran on first down, half the distance you needed on second down, and on third and fourth down did you convert, right? Like that's success rate. By contrast, like their EPA, which is like expected points per attempt, like how much did it advance you towards scoring, is very low. And so I think kind of as you said in your question, like they've been pretty efficient. They've not been explosive at all out of the run game. And that's for, multiple reasons. Again, like I think obviously the running back room is a work in progress, right? Like 2 guys got 20 carries against Texas to start the first game, and those guys might be like 3rd and 4th on the depth chart now, right? You have like 2 freshmen who have probably been looked the most consistent as runners. I actually think that CJ Donaldson's probably been better than some people give him credit for. Like he does, I think some things well, getting north south in the run game. But obviously, like I think a lot of people expected James Peoples to be the guy this year, and that has not come to fruition. So you got freshmen, they're not making a lot of guys miss. You also, for all the reasons we talked about, like, heavy personnel packages, more guys in the box. It's just sort of hard to get past the second level. So, the numbers do bear out that like they've been best running stretch to the boundary, which again, I always, laugh at because that drives people crazy. But that's been their most consistent run play, both in terms of success rate at EPA. But like, I think for this group, like I still think, I think we're going to see more of Jackson and West. But if they're efficient and they're not super explosive on the run game, like that's not the end of the world because they have this such explosive potential from Smith and Tate and Claire as well.
All right, so now we got to talk about this weekend's game between Ohio State and Penn State. And I think over the summer, we expected to come into this game with all sorts of storylines and national championship implications on both sides and Big Ten championship implications on both sides. And it just, one of the biggest games on the college football calendar. And one side of this game has held up its end of the bargain, and the other side of this game has not had the season it expected. And the head coach who we expected to be talking about this week is no longer there. And the starting quarterback who we expected to be talking about this week is no longer there. So Ohio State is currently about a 3-touchdown favorite against Penn State this weekend. Not the number I think anyone was expecting over the course of the summer. But one storyline that is going to be exactly what we thought it was going to be is the storyline of Jim Knowles' defense against the Ohio State offense. And obviously they're not having exactly the season that they expected to have either, but we had a question from Todd Roberts 4217 on YouTube. Can Ross talk about how Ohio State will attack Penn State and Jim Knowles' defense? It will be interesting to see the chess game between both Knowles and Day/Hartline will play to gain an advantage on play calling since both know each other's schemes, etc. So, all right, I guess let's start with how big of an advantage is it to know each other, have been in the building with each other for the last 3 years, and to, you have gone up against each other, you've seen how the other person responds. How big of an advantage is that? Or is it an advantage for either side? Or is it just kind of, they both know each other, so it's going to be, you kind of throw it out the window?
Yeah, I mean, it probably cancels each other out. It probably forces you to break tendencies more. But like, as I said, I think that given, Knowles is very familiar with Day. Day's obviously very familiar with Knowles, but it also matters a lot, like who the personnel is and what they're doing. So like earlier this season, Jim Knowles was basically like rerunning the hits from Ohio State's playoff run, like things we talked about last year, spilling the football outside, using a lot of like those 3 high safety looks, a lot of what we saw from Ohio State's defense. And then during this recent skid, he's really been sort of throwing the kitchen sink at things, trying to find out what's working. I mean, Penn State's really thin at linebacker. I think that's impacting them and what they're trying to do. So that stuff's probably going to matter more because, as I said, like as familiar as Knowles is with Day, like it cuts both ways.
Yeah, they have been playing a former walk-on at linebacker and just sort of checking out some Penn State media. The response from the fan base and the current grades from the fan base. I haven't looked at PFF on him, but the grades from the fan base have not been real positive. So that's certainly a storyline that we'll be keeping an eye on this week. So if you're Ohio State and you know what you know about Jim Knowles, but you know that Jim Knowles knows what he knows about you, and you know now what, sort of where Penn State is personnel-wise on defense, what do you do? To Todd's question, how will Ohio State go after Penn State and Jim Knowles' defense?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to me to see what Knowles does with the RPO threat. I guess would be my first step. Like, he may play a lot of cover 1 and sort of be aggressive, in which case Ohio State will have the opportunities to attack downfield. I assume he wants to probably cancel out Ohio State's run game. So I think it'll be probably he'll be more aggressive than what you've seen just in terms of like his cover 1 usage relative to other opponents. And so I do think that'll probably give Ohio State opportunities downfield if they take their shots.
All right. Well, we will find out. We will find out together on Saturday when the Buckeyes take on Penn State. The game kicks off at noon Eastern on Fox. We'll have our full team there covering that game from beginning to end. We'll have our live pregame show, our live postgame show, all of that you can find at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. We'll have our full coverage after the game as well. You'll be able to find your postgame press conferences, all that kind of stuff, including the live Ryan Day press conference on our postgame show But you can find that all at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. We're going to have plenty to talk about in the lead up to that game as well as we count down the days to that game. And then, of course, we have plenty to talk about afterwards. And we would love to talk about with you all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That's where we have our whole team, covering recruiting, covering X's and O's, and more. That's all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And thanks again to our sponsors at Jeff Ruby's of Columbus, the award-winning upscale steakhouse in downtown Columbus, named one of the top 50 steakhouses in America by Food Network. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation today. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.